Hey guys, today we're going to learn about this thing called the math class, which is another whole set of pre-written code that's already included in your JDK, just like we use for the scanner class. And as you can probably imagine, it does math for us. The thing about a computer, like a basic just machine language 1 and 0s computer, is it can't really do a whole lot of math. It can add and it can subtract in binary with 1s and 0s. Because it can add, it can multiply, and it can kind of divide. We've seen it does division kind of weird, but that's basically it. It does those 4 things, and division it doesn't even really do all that well. So I wrote a program here where we are asked to enter some number between 2 and 7, and a decimal that's more than 10. And we're going to see how the computer, with just the machine language, without any other help from any Java libraries, raises things to powers or takes square roots or absolute values or those other things that you learned how to do in your math class. So I'm going to go ahead and enter, like for my integer, I'm going to enter the value of 5. And then for my decimal that's more than 10, I'll put in like 11.5. And when I press enter, it's going to say 11.5 raised to the 5th power is, oh crud, it doesn't know. The square root of 5 is, oh, it doesn't know. The absolute value of 11.5 minus 5 is raspberries. It doesn't know. So we need to use other code to get these things to actually work out. And that's where the math class comes in. So the math class is a whole bunch of pre-written code that's already in Java. It's in your JDK. Just like we use pre-written code to create a scanner object, and so we can scan things, we have a math class that has a bunch of pre-written code. And to access it, unlike the previous library, we don't need to import anything. Math is such a part of so many things computers do that they don't bother making you import the functions or methods that are in the math library. You can just access them. But the way you do that is going to look, I hope, somewhat familiar. I'm going to go ahead and make this text visible. You're going to start with the word capital M math, dot, and then some method in the math class, and I'll tell you which methods we're going to use. There's a few of them we use frequently. So math dot some math method in the math class, and then whatever parameters you need to send to that method will be next. So for example, if I wanted to raise a number to a power, what I would do is there is a method in the math class that's called pow. If I wanted to do something like this, the code that I would type is, I need to get my face out of the way. I would type capital M math dot pow, and that tells the computer, go to that little library that's called math. In there's a method called pow, and to that method I want you to pass the values 2 and 3. And then this method will return whatever 2 to the 3rd is. So this is something you want to memorize or know pretty well. Another thing we might want to do is square root a number, right? We love square root and stuff. So if I wanted to square root a value, I can straight up, like let's say I had a variable called user number, and that could be of type int or of type double. The computer can't do that by itself, but it can rely on methods in the math class, and the specific code you'd want to use would look like this. Capital M math dot square root. So this tells the computer, go to that library called math. In there is a method that someone else wrote called sqrt, and pass to it the value of whatever the user number was. So you could put an actual number here, or just a variable name. Now I'm going to move my face way over here and show you the last 2, because I'm starting to repeat myself a lot. The other 2 that we'll use in this class is like to find the absolute value of a number, and that's math.abs, and then you can send a single number. So maybe it's 7 minus a, maybe it's a specific value, so you can send that specific value as a parameter to that method. Maybe it's a variable that you named myInt, and then the user would enter that and get that answer out. The last thing that doesn't actually take any parameters is the constant for pi, a really accurate approximation for pi. You can just say math.pi. So I hope our work with methods makes it more clear what we mean by sending these numbers to the method. And I hope our work with the scanner class lets us understand why we have this dot notation. This tells the computer where to look, and in this library, There's a method called square root. There's a method called POW. There's a method called ABS for absolute value. There are many, many, many more methods that are in the math class. You can feel free to Google them and look them up. But I'm going to pause the video and modify my code and show you the modified code to see what it really should look like from the beginning. So I'm going to pause and show you some code in about, well, to you it'll be seconds, to me it'll be 3 or 4 minutes. Now I'm up here. So here's a quick method where I haven't put any of those math methods in yet. You can see that I'm importing a Java scanner class object because I'm going to ask the user for some information. I'm going to ask for an integer and a double. And I need to create that scanner object, so all that code is how it's been. We're going to open the program by saying, please enter an integer between 2 and 7 and a decimal that's more than 10. Now here's something you might not know you could do. I can have the computer do this and then put these two statements right next to each other, and then the computer will let me like enter one, enter the other right off the bat. You'll see it in practice. If that doesn't make sense, don't worry about it, to the side. But we can get values for A and B from the user. I also want to point out that for reasons that are not really clear to me, I decided to call my scanner in instead of scan, just to make the point that you can call this thing anything you want, and this is another common name for a scanner object. So the first thing I want to do is, once the user enters an integer and a double, I want them to raise b to the power of a. So then the system will say that value raised to the power of a is plus. I'm going to access the math class's power method. So it's capital M math, dot pow for power. And I want to send b as the base and a as the exponent. So what will happen is, once the computer reads this part of the code, it's going to send the value of b and the value of a to a method called POW that's in the math library, and it'll return whatever b to the a power is. If I want to get the square root of a, I could, I have that value for a stored from the user. I'm going to add, I want to go to that math library, and I want to go to that square root method, and I want to send whatever value that user entered, and it will return the square root of that value. To get the absolute value of the difference of b and a, I'll do capital M math, because that's the name of the class that does this stuff. The method I want is the absolute value, and I want to send to it b minus a. So it'll take b minus a, subtract, send that one value to this method, and then it'll return the absolute value of those values, the absolute value of those numbers. So let's see this in action. I'm going to build this. Hopefully it won't break. Oh, I must have typed something in wrong. Let's see where my mistake is. Oh, ABS would be a better thing to type, right? Now it'll build. And I'm going to run this guy. I'm going to move. So I'll get onto the values of 5. And maybe like 10.5. And this time it'll actually do some math. Now, I do not like the way this printed out because you can't really see what's going on. So I'm going to modify my code with some printlns. So I apologize for that. This should be println. This should be println. We'll build it and run it. Move this over here. I'll put in the 5 space 10.2. And there it goes. 10.2 raised to the 5th is this huge number. The square root of 5 is this gross number. The absolute value of 10.2 minus 5 is this crazy number that it's totally not, but it's really close. And it's actually doing what it's supposed to be doing. It's sending these values to the various methods and getting the answers. While I'm on the video here, I want to point out that you guys have probably noticed that these decimals, like if you take 10.2 and subtract 5, it's 5.2. It's not 5.1999. Computers are not really doing real math. They're doing an approximation of math. And that's why this stuff happens. We are going to learn a way to make these decimals behave the way you would expect later on in this chapter. So it's not that my coding is wrong, it's just the computer is having a rounding error. But at the end of all this, what I basically want you guys to know is we have tons of pre-written code in a thing called a math class. I want you to be aware of how to take a number to a power, how to square root a number, how to find the absolute value, and know how to call the methods in that library with the appropriate parameters. And I want you to be aware of these specific math class methods. There's some new assignments for you to try out that will use this stuff. Do not use these methods for any of the assignments that were already due. This is all for assignments that are due after today. So good luck, good luck, good luck.